So, I've been wanting to do this video for a while now, so I'm very excited. And if you don't know what this video is about, first off, I don't know why you clicked into this video, because as the title says, I am going to be solving an Agatha Christie mystery. I've been seeing this trend going around, but I've never actually watched any of those videos because I don't want to be spoiled. That also means that I don't know how other people do this, so I'm just gonna do this my way. And since this is still an arts channel, I'm going to be incorporating elements of art. What I'm gonna be doing is obviously reading the book, but also annotating it, so taking notes on all of the characters, potential suspects, the crime scene, physical evidence, motives, and all of that are going on the store. What we're also gonna do is, instead of just the names of the characters or a description of the crime scene, I'm going to draw each of the main characters and also the crime scene. Now, I don't know how much that will help in actually solving the mystery, but it seems like something fun to do, so we're doing it. I'm starting with the first in the Poirot series because I want to, and also I've been wanting to read the whole Poirot series in chronological order to kind of get a fuller picture of his arc, so we're starting with this. Let's get started. So there's a lot happening in the last few pages of chapter 2, because I think this is like the lead up to the murder. So all of the characters are here. So many things are happening at the same time, and I mean, the narrator says himself that he's like trying to recite everything in detail. So there's a lot that I need to pay attention to. There are like characters coming into the scene and then other characters reacting to that. I think the reactions are really important too. So there actually is like a map of the house in chapter 3, which is really helpful. So right now we have been introduced to who I assume is going to be the victim, Mrs. Inglethorpe. She used to be Mrs. Cavendish, but after her husband, Mr. Cavendish, died, leaving her all of his fortune, she now lives with her new husband, Alfred Inglethorpe, and her 2 stepsons, John and Lawrence Cavendish. Both of them are married, but we've only been introduced to John's wife, who is Mary Cavendish. And then we also have Evie Howard, who is this kind of servant slash companion to Mrs. Inglethorpe, but actually by the end of chapter 1, she leaves. And I don't know if she's gonna crop up again in the later chapters, but she seems to have a very significant role in this family. Maybe not in the murder, but certainly in the family. And then we also have Cynthia Murdoch, who is this orphan girl that Mrs. Inglethorpe takes in. And then Dr. Bowerstein, who is Mary's friend, Mary Cavendish's friend. And then Mrs. Rakes, who is allegedly having an affair with Alfred, but we don't know much about her yet. And in the first chapter, there's a lot of talk about poison and poisoning. There was specifically a conversation about using poison as a way to murder. And so far, we already know that Lawrence, Cynthia, Dr. Bauerstein, and Mary are related to poison in some way. So Dr. Bauerstein is like a specialist in poison. Lawrence used to be a doctor. Cynthia works in a hospital. Mary doesn't have a direct relationship with poison or the medical profession, but she is Dr. Bauerstein's good friend, and also she brings up the topic of poisoning. So I'm up to chapter 4, and the murder has just happened. So I'm gonna start with establishing a timeline first. So on July 17th, there's this kind of weird meeting between the narrator, Cynthia, and Lawrence, and also Poirot. That's where they first meet Poirot. But there seems to be something going on between Cynthia and Lawrence, and we don't know what yet, but I think there's something going on there. There's this extremely important exchange between Mary and Emily, the victim. They're clearly like arguing over something, so that has probably something to do with Mary's motive. And then on the same night, so the night of July 17th, there's this whole exchange where Emily asks for coffee, and then the coffee goes through a few hands before getting to Emily. So I'm guessing that that's where poisoning happens, or this is going to be a huge distraction and the poisoning actually happens someplace else, some other time. That's a huge possibility too, actually. Now that I think about it more, the whole coffee thing might actually be a distraction. I think it all depends on how the poison actually works, like if the effects are immediate or delayed. If it's delayed, then it's likely to be the coffee thing. If it's immediate, then there is a possibility that the murder happened when everybody was in the room when Emily died. There are a few things that are really weird. First off, Dr. Bauerstein comes in covered in mud, which he explains by saying that he fell. I'm gonna call bullshit, but we'll see. The whole exchange with the coffee thing ends with the narrator, Cynthia, and John all seeing Emily with the coffee in her hands, but the coffee is untouched. And then another weird thing is that Alfred ends up leaving with Dr. Bauerstein, and it's specifically mentioned that he takes the key of the house. Then we have the most important date, July 18th. So the night of the 17th ends with all of them going to bed. And then at midnight, I think around midnight, I can't actually remember. Right, so the narrator actually says, and I quote, "It seemed to be the middle of the night when I was awakened by Lawrence Cavendish." So he does say middle of the night, but later on, just a few pages after that, we find out that it's actually already 5 in the morning, at least according to the clock in Emily's room. And then a little bit later, the narrator also looks at his watch, which shows 6 o'clock. So it's not actually midnight, it's closer to dawn. And what happens is that, like I just quoted, the narrator was woken up by Lawrence and they together went to check on Emily because they had heard commotions, sounding like she was struggling and in pain. So they tried to open her door at first, but it's locked. So they tried to go into Alfred's room. There are actually 3 doors leading into Emily's room. And when they went into Alfred's room to try to get into Emily's room, Alfred wasn't actually there, and his bed was unslept in. And then Cynthia, it was mentioned that it took a while to wake her, that she was like really sound asleep, which I don't know if she's just a deep sleeper or if there's something fishy going on. But they end up breaking into Emily's room through the front door. And then they find Emily in bed, struggling, having like a stroke or a seizure or something. That's when Dr. Bauerstein comes in, and he explains later that he was just passing by when he saw a car leaving the house trying to go fetch Emily's personal doctor. But anyways, I'm gonna do some more reading and then check back in with you. We start in the room of the crime scene, from the door in a clockwise direction. The door to Alfred's room is bolted. On the chest of drawers, there is a tray with a spirit lamp and a saucer of cocoa. This tray was brought to Emily by Annie on the night of the 17th at 8 p.m. Before that, there was a 45-minute window during which the tray was left in the hallway where anybody had access to it. And according to Annie's testimony, when she retrieved the tray from the hallway, she saw what she thought was salt on the tray. On the chest of drawers is also an empty cup with a saucer. Then we move on to the left window, in front of which there is a round stain on the carpet. Now moving past the left window, we reach the dressing table on which Lawrence left his candle, a pink candle in specific. Then moving on to the mantelpiece. On the mantelpiece are ornaments, spill vases, and a clock. In the ashes in the grate, there are pieces left from a burnt will. This will was written on the afternoon of the 17th, and it was witnessed by Will and Manning, the 2 gardeners. The door to Cynthia's room is bolted as well, and there are fibers left from what seems to be a green fabric. Then moving on to the writing desk, there is a candle grease on the carpet. According to Annie, who delivered the tray of cocoa to Emily at 8 p.m. on the night of the 17th, the candle grease wasn't on the floor at that time, so it could have only been made after 8 p.m. and it cannot be made with Lawrence's candle. On the desk is a purple dispatch case. It is locked with a spare key in the lock and a piece of wire attached to the key. The original key was stolen during lunchtime on the 17th. Then onto the fallen bedside table. The crushed coffee cup cannot be analyzed. Then in the drawers of the washing stand is an empty box of sleeping powder. Hey there! I just finished chapter 6 titled The Inquest, in which the coroner questioned everybody in the family and also potential witnesses. The post-mortem also finally happened, and we know for sure now that it's strychnine poisoning. But right now I just want to talk about one thing, which is there were specifically 2 witnesses, Dorcas, the servant, and Mary, who said that they overheard Emily and Alfred fighting on the day of her death at around like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But the thing is, nobody actually saw Alfred in the room. They just heard Emily fighting with a man, and they assumed it was Alfred because they thought it sounded like him, and also because Emily was talking about something about a scandal between a wife and a husband, so they just thought it had to be Alfred, and their assumption was that Emily had found out about Alfred having an affair. But right now I'm leaning towards the person that Emily had fought with not being Alfred. And then there's another witness who is the chemist's assistant, who testified that he sold strychnine to Alfred on the 16th. And there's apparently a signature of Alfred that proves that it was him, but Alfred insists that it wasn't him that bought the poison and the signature was forged. And another thing is that everybody suspects Alfred, with one notable exception, which is Lawrence, who keeps insisting that it was a natural death, which makes him seem very sus too. I keep thinking there's something between him and Cynthia, so I'm thinking maybe Cynthia had made some kind of a mistake with the sleeping powder. It might be a mistake or on purpose, I don't know, but she might have done something, and Lawrence might be trying to cover that up. And then John is a weird one too, because he's the most cooperative, and there's nothing really against him, but that also makes me think he's very sus. He has a very weird relationship with his wife, Mary, who is another one of my biggest suspects. Yeah, I'm starting to think that the theory I had at the very beginning about two people being involved, and the pairing would likely be Lawrence and Cynthia, and then Mary and Dr. Bauerstein. I could still be wrong though. We'll see. Let's keep on reading. Right, so you know how I kept thinking that Mary was somehow tied to Dr. Bauerstein and that they were maybe working together? Well, now I'm thinking maybe, well, they still might be working together, but I feel like there might be more ties between Mary and John than I had thought. Like, even though they were married, I had thought that like their relationship was so, I don't know, kind of like cold and weak. She was one of the witnesses to the argument that Emily had the day before she died, and she was obviously trying to hide what she had overheard. So maybe Emily was actually fighting with John, and that's why Mary was trying to cover for him. Yeah, there's still a lot to be learned about their relationship, John and Mary's. Let's keep going. So there's been a pretty big development. According to Poirot, there were no less than 5 witnesses placing Alfred at the farm with Mrs. Raikes on the afternoon that allegedly Alfred bought the poison. So he has a pretty airtight alibi now. And I had thought that means Alfred was definitely having an affair with Mrs. Raikes, but he's still denying that vehemently. There's probably some other stuff going on there, but I'd say Alfred is pretty much in the clear right now for me. And then something else that came up that is really against Mary is that one of the things that she said during the inquest was she was woken up by her alarm at 4:30 in the morning. And then in a few minutes, she heard the bedside table in Emily's room fall over, which is pretty much proven now to be bullshit. Because Poirot and Hastings did sort of an experiment where Poirot asked Hastings to stand in the hall on the left side of the house. Emily's room is on the right side. Without Hastings' knowledge, Poirot went to Emily's room, deliberately pushed the bedside table over, and Hastings didn't hear a thing. So how did Mary hear the bedside table fall over at 4:30 in the morning? Poirot just asked Hastings to relay a message from him to Lawrence, and the message is, find the extra coffee cup and you can rest in peace. So clearly Poirot is trying to bait Lawrence. I'm not fully understanding how that works. Dr. Bauerstein has been arrested, which makes me think that he is most likely not the murderer. Right now my main suspects are John and Mary.
5 minutes later.
Dr. Bauerstein is a German spy. I think Mary knows. She must know. The question is if Emily knew. And I'm still not sure how this whole thing fits into the murder. A million theories just went through my mind, and some of them I can cross out. The first thing is that for a second I thought the man that Emily was arguing with might be Lawrence, but I went back and read the first little bit of the book and I remembered something very crucial, which is that during the time when Emily was arguing with somebody, Hastings, Lawrence, and Cynthia were together. They were having tea together, so there was no way that the man Emily was arguing with was Lawrence. It had to be John. Regarding the fact that Dr. Bauerstein is a spy, Poirot and Hastings were talking about the relationship between Dr. Bauerstein and Mary, and Poirot said that Bauerstein is pretty much just using Mary to hide his own doings. Whether or not he actually had feelings for Mary, we don't know, but I guess it's not very important. What is important is Mary's feelings towards Bauerstein, and Poirot thinks that Mary doesn't care at all about Bauerstein because he thinks she cares about somebody else. Lawrence told Hastings that he indeed found the extra coffee cup, whatever that means. But I think that this just supports the theory that Lawrence was probably covering for somebody. I think I just got spoiled. Well, I didn't get spoiled, but I didn't think the solution was gonna come so early. Well, not the solution, but the answer at least. Because there's a chapter at the very end called Poirot Explains. I thought that that would be the final chapter that tells us the answer, but I think we have already got our answer here. John has been arrested, and apparently Poirot is behind that arrest. I have said that John is my strongest suspect.
Approximately 10 hours later.
I'm torn now. I'm torn between John actually being the murderer and Mary being the murderer. Because we know that John is arrested now. But I feel like there's still a possibility that all of this is just a ruse on Poirot's part to test Mary and get her to confess. I don't know. Because Mary said she heard the table fall on the morning of the 18th, I'm inclined to believe that she was there. She was there in the room, in Emily's room. Okay then, I still have so many unanswered questions, but here is my final guess, my best guess. I honestly don't even care if I'm right or wrong anymore. I just want to get it over with and get to the solution. First of all, John is the murderer. The poison was in the cup on the bedside table, the crushed one. It is not the cup that Alfred had brought to Emily. The candle grease was probably left by him too. He was in Emily's room at some point. Mary saw or heard everything John did, and she's trying to cover for him. Another theory that I have that I'm only half sure about is that the reason Cynthia didn't hear anything on the morning of the 18th, she didn't hear the table fall, she only woke up when Mary went to get her. The reason for that is that somebody slipped sleeping powder into her coffee, the cup of coffee that has sugar in it, even though she doesn't take sugar. There are 3 more chapters left, so I'm gonna finish it, and we'll see how much I got right and how much I got wrong. I think at least I got the murder right. It's gotta be John. If not John, then Mary. That's my second guess. If not John, then definitely Mary. Do you see this? The last chapter is titled Poirot Explains. Yes, explain it to me, Poirot. Explain it to me, because I do not understand.
A few moments later.
Poirot just mentioned something that I had completely forgotten, but that is so crucial. Evelyn and Alfred are cousins. I got the murderer wrong, but at least I got this right. Lawrence is in love with Cynthia. He's trying to protect her. He thinks that Cynthia did it, so he's trying to protect her. I got that right. You see this? I got this right. He crushed the coffee cup. And so, the $1 million question, who killed Emily? It was Alfred and Evelyn. Evelyn isn't even on here. Let's see the murderer's face. Let's do it now. So, what happened was that Alfred and Evie had always planned on getting close to Emily and murdering her for the money. Their plan was to utilize the fact that Emily takes this tonic that contains strychnine and also bromide, which is the sleeping powder, to murder her, because Evie's father used to be a doctor and she has the medical knowledge. She knows that these 2 drugs combined will kill somebody. Their original plan was to kill Emily on the 17th. They had everything planned out. It was supposed to go down on the 17th. But surprisingly, Emily forgot to take the tonic, her medicine, that night, so she didn't die that night. Alfred wrote Evie a letter. While he was writing the letter, he was interrupted by Emily. This letter he locked in his desk, but this letter was later found by Emily, and Emily now knows that Alfred and Evie are trying to kill her. She doesn't know when, she doesn't know how, but she knows that she's in danger. So she burns the will that would have benefited Alfred. The first time when she was arguing with John, the scandal that she was talking about was John's affair with Mrs. Rakes. But when, I think it was Annie or Dorcas, I can't remember, one of the servants came later, that time when she talked about a scandal, that was her own scandal. That was after she'd found out that Alfred was trying to kill her. So on the night of the 17th, Emily took the sleeping powder and her medicine, and she died. And Alfred and Evie's plan to escape was to actually get Alfred arrested, but because they knew that the court wouldn't have been able to convict him, he would have been let off, and they wouldn't have been able to prosecute him again. And that's why Evie was always so vehement about getting Alfred arrested. It was just smoke and mirrors. And the person who impersonated Alfred was Evie. They're cousins, they look alike. Mary drugged Cynthia and Emily because she thought that Emily had evidence of John cheating on her, so she wanted to find that evidence. So her plan was to sneak into Emily's room through Cynthia's room to find that evidence she thought existed. She drugged Cynthia through the coffee cup and then Emily through the cocoa. After Emily died, she, for a second, thought that it was her doing. Even though she didn't use strychnine, it was just, it wasn't sleeping powder, I don't think, but it was some kind of non-lethal drug. But she got really scared. She thought she might have been the murderer, so she disposed of Cynthia's coffee cup. But she couldn't touch the cocoa because that was too obvious in the room. And so the extra coffee cup that Lawrence found was the one that Mary disposed of. And I was right about Lawrence protecting Cynthia. I knew there was something between them. And then one thing I got right was that the stain on the carpet in front of the window, I think I forgot to mention this before, but I did guess that that was from the coffee that Mary made for Emily. Emily didn't drink that coffee because she spilled it accidentally. And then she put the cup on the bedside table. That's the cup that fell on the floor. And then later it was Lawrence who stepped on it, thinking that it was Cynthia who had poisoned Emily. And the reason that Poirot allowed John to be put on trial was to try to repair Mary and John's relationship, which I don't know how I feel about that, but okay. Anyways, this was a lot more fun than I thought it would be. It's definitely not the best of her works. The ending was very surprising and very exciting, but I think throughout the book there wasn't anything too like entertaining, and I didn't care that much about the character relationships, so it's definitely not one that like I would go back to again and again. I would say though that this book does a really good job of establishing Poirot and Hastings. Their personalities are very distinct. I'm not gonna say likable per se, because Hastings is kind of annoying in some parts of the book, but they're definitely very lifelike. You could definitely imagine them as real human beings with real emotions. And Poirot is definitely very likable in this. He's very adorable. But that's it for this video. If you're still here, good for you. And good for me as well, because this took a pretty long time to film, and it's going to take a while to edit too. So if you enjoy this video, please, please, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And I will see you when I see you.